Moving on to our next talk from Valérie Saintot, Data Visualization as a Vector of Innovation, the Case for Lawyers. Now, Valérie Saintot is the head of the Legislation Division and Legal KM, DG Legal at the European Central Bank. Valérie has worked in several EU institutions and completed her PhD with an emphasis on knowledge sharing and visualization. Her focus is currently on legal thinking, design thinking, and legal knowledge visualization, in particular using your Lex as a key source of legislative information. In this talk, we're going to learn a lot about a conceptual framework which is called the Visual Syllogism, and I am very much looking forward to learning what that is. Valérie, over to you. Can't quite hear you yet, Valérie, so if you could just start from the top, we'll hear you hopefully very soon.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for having me today, and a special greetings to the wonderful colleagues at the Office of Publications, with whom we work very closely and appreciate the huge efforts to facilitate this pan-European discussion on open data and visualization, and probably global discussion. Allow me a few words of introduction to explain the perspective wherefrom I'm contributing to this conference today. I present to you in several, let's say, integrated capacities as a lawyer, as a European civil servant, as a designer, as a citizen also engaged in the development of a data-driven societal dialogues for the betterment of knowledge sharing in civil society, with very in line with what 16 said a moment ago, the overarching goal to elevate the starting point of the public debate. A second important remark that I also wish to make is that upfront is that what I present is by choice, not perfect and glossy, because in my 20 years of experience with visualization and design outside the usual places where you find design, communication, PR, architecture, and many more domains, it is only when it is not shiny perfect that visualization become a lever for collective intelligence and knowledge sharing. So I show more the backstage than the front stage today. And finally, I also want to underline, as you will see, that I encompass both data visualization and knowledge visualization. To make it simple, data visualization is much more geared toward quantitative and numerical output, while knowledge visualization is broader and include a larger array of techniques and toolboxes to deliver content and visual rendering. So why visualization? To start with, I see useful to raise our gaze a moment and reflect on the bigger picture. Basically, when we look at visualization for lawyers, public and private organizations, in-house department, law firms, it's very important to realize how much transparency by now has become the hallmark of our time. In its bright side, technology has enabled a very different relations to accessing data, information, and knowledge. And when transparency is coupled with accountability, the public sphere can be enriched with useful insight about how the world around us operates, commits to, and achieve or not the objective it has set to pursue. And generally, we are good at communicating objectives. We are less good at reporting about how well we have met or not these objectives, in particular in politics. So this approach to making public our talk helps with checking if we walk the talks. If we do walk the talk, it creates trust and empowers a very different kind of dynamics in politics, economic activities, and in the relation between the citizen and the other societal agents. So we create the basis for a more sustainable future and societal dynamics in our many different ecosystems that intersect. So providing visualizing obeys ethical principle and avoid misleading the viewer, and I particularly appreciate the question you sent off 16 to answer in the chat, I see the need to have very ethical and philosophical consideration whether having impact with visualization is a free ride or shall be ring-fenced with a certain spine in ethical terms. So the conversation cannot stop with glossy visualization output. It also needs to entail this reflection, but this is for another conference. So looking at now why visualizing the law matters. On the big scheme of things, in a moment, we will see the more operational reasons in the rest of this presentation, but on the bigger scheme of things, the law plays a central role in orchestrating human relation. It is essential for peace, keeping as it ambitions to regulate conflict, small and big, from buying your baguette of bread to much more complex trading agreements. By having legal certainty, it makes the textile interlinking societal agent more trustworthy and generates stability, which is crucial for outgrowing the challenges of our times. And so how do we go about that? I take a minute on this a little bit more abstract slide, which is a methodology slide to understand how and why in the depths of things visualization has the power to help us collectively solve the challenges of our time. Much of what I have presented until now can be activated by using visualization. Visualization helps us with our collective cognition. We too often reduce our knowing to what happens in our individual physical brain. Yet cognition appears for the tenets of the theory of extended cognition to be a process involving many more dimensions. We know with our bodies, embodied cognition. We know in that we relate to other fellow beings, extended cognition. We know when we pose acts, following up on our ideas, enactive cognition, and we know in context, embedded cognition. If we harness these multiple dimensions, helping ourselves with visualization, we completely transform the collective conversation. And my research shows that visualization in daily business unveil these different dimensions and render them accessible. We can then work on better engineering the mobilization or generation of knowledge and know-how. We can tap unused bucket of creativity, innovation, wisdom that if we don't use visualization is only hazardously mobilized and activated. So what we do with the data and knowledge that we use is, as you can see on this slide, nothing original to say the least. It's a very well-known sequence. So we ensure that data are collected. We visualize, we prepare the data, we visualize, we analyze, we communicate, we draw action. This is a very classical set of components. It looks linear, but it can be, of course, obviously iterative. There might be some phases with many looping. As you see on the screen, the challenge of this nice narrative is that the ball seems to often stop after the analysis phase. There is a lot of work and enthusiasm and effort and time and money invested up to that moment. But from there on, all becomes complicated. Oftentimes, it appears that one key blocker is that those generating the data visualization and those susceptible of meaningfully using them are separated and do not necessarily interact. One big plea from me today to the broader community, but I know I'm just one of many voices advocating this approach, is to break the silo between data scientists, topic expert in the context of our talk, lawyers, and decision makers, to tap the full potential and not just leave data visualization and knowledge visualization as a set of sophisticated, nice to have that some lost communicator are always pestering us with. No, it has such a huge potential that it cannot be, let's say, delegated to others. What we do with what we see is exactly what a minute ago you kindly indicated, the visual syllogism. So basically, it's also to bring home, and that's a small tip, to bring home to the lawyers, the thinking as a syllogism is one of the thinking art lawyer apply. If the rule is so and the facts are this, then the conclusion is Z. The same is here. If your problem is X and the data show Y, then we should have a conversation on Z. And exactly to break the fact that data visualization and the added value of data visualization stop at the moment of having conversation that would become committal on action planning. So that's it for the visual syllogism. There would be more to say, but let's continue to discover concrete example. So zooming ever closer to some of these concrete examples, let me expose briefly the way we have worked on data visualization using data from URLEX database. Our problem was we needed a lot of manual effort to have a simple overview of the assets in our ECB legal framework, because many people may not know, but we are also a legislator along the other three well-known EU legislators. So recently, we're celebrating the 20 years of the ECB, and we could not manage by the click of the button to draw a list how many legal acts are in force. We have it, that's not the problem, but it was requiring quite some efforts. How many regulation, decision, recommendation have been adopted, but also have been amended, have been repealed, have been recast by the ECB. So we realized that we would benefit from looking at our legal framework from a more quantitative perspective. And this is the different, on this slide, you see the different parameters that we had to square in order to get our way further. And as an anecdote, we quickly understood that we needed to work on creating clear taxonomies to access complete and high quality metadata that we could not save also on a lot of definition work with a strong legal character. We could never have delegated that to a data scientist without either an extremely integrated conversation, or even better, to have a very competent legal analyst who knows the legal dimension and are versed into data science to actually realize the following. If you would ask ECB and regulation in a standard search in URLEX in September 2020, you would get 1,100 response items. And it takes a split of a second to draw the conclusion that if you are not knowledgeable about our framework, nothing to say if you are not a lawyer, you need to have a certain understanding that the ECB has adopted 111 regulations since its creation. But this is not the case. It has adopted 25 regulations, and we know regulation have primary effect in member states, and we work with the relay of the central bank, and we are not having so many legal acts that have these direct effect at national level. So there would be a misrepresentation if somebody, not knowing exactly how it works, would not have worked with the data scientists to actually decompose the whole question in data, information, and knowledge, so that we use the difference for me between data and information crunching versus knowledge visualization is that to shift to knowledge visualization, you do need human cognition and some potentially explicit but oftentimes tacit knowledge brought to the discussion table. So when we continued our journey, we in the end, decided that the set of data that we had crunched was far too rich and far too useful to just be left for internal purposes. And we created the first institutional corner where you find, and if you go online, urlex.europa.eu, under institution bank, you see what we call visual navigation. It's modest, but it exists, it's there, and it has shown extremely great potential. You see that the bar chart are really not fancy, but are very rational choices because they ensure that the backend runs smoothly and real-time up to date. And all the bar are interactive, and then you can continue your search journey further down the line, and you get at a glance in a couple of graphs the entire anatomy of the ECB legal framework by topic, by year, by type of acts. So we wanted to also not only avail for those using our framework, but also the general public by means of reaching out through this communication tool, a different way of allowing people to access a body of law that is very important. So when you look at these different projects, so thanks to this project and the excellent cooperation work with the colleagues at the office, we now have a useful piloting tool to continue the journey of zooming and drilling and combining qualitative textual analysis with quantitative data visualization to generate understanding and insights for the whole, for our colleague internally, but of course for a much broader public. And interestingly enough, when we look at the dashboard that we use to understand a little better the how it works, we realize that indeed the use of the ECB pages on Urlex are very much outside the EU institution, which is not, we are not feeding into the echo chamber syndrome, but we are really reaching out to externals. So 2% is only people from the institution, while 98% are people outside the institution. We have 10 topics which are front runner, which is a very good indicator for our communication efforts otherwise. And we have a sense of what are the big topic for being downloaded, which incentivize us to also work on the digital publication side of things. So I move now to another view, which is still for lawyers, looking also at internal matters. So changing the focal and also presenting an example of the internal use. The first infographic in the middle of the slides helps to understand and for instance, ground a discussion which was on confidentiality, personal data, and secrecy, into quantitative. If we had, and we had previously, a conversation about these topics, we realized that it goes very much in discussion in principle and in abstract. But from the moment we transform the conversation into quantitative, all of a sudden the magnitude of the challenge and the necessity to evolve our jurisprudence was obvious. And so normally this would not have been at the legal discussion table, but thanks to bringing these quantitative data vis, we could contribute and evolve the discussion. That's one of many examples going in the same logic. The Sankey, many of my visual are not really readable. Don't get upset with that. That's not the point. It's just to show. If you would have to explore the physiognomy of one of the legal acts, the ECB issues, which is we call ECB opinions on a draft proposal of EU legislation, you think, okay, you have for the period 2015-2020, 46 of them. So you think 46 requests, 46 opinion, life is straight and forward. But it's, of course, much more complicated. You can have different type of acts that are subject to our opinion making. You can have one or several institutions requesting our advice, and then you have only out of these multiple variables only to output opinion and letters of non-issuance. And by using a simple Sankey, we could then highlight the complexity and appreciate also some discussion on the workload generated by ECB opinion making. The bottom one is more to have a sentiment of where our legislative effort by topic have gone. Of course, the bigger the part in the portion in the bar chart, the higher the number of opinion issued. So we have also more and more bringing this dimension that we crunch internally in the legal department in order to have some data-driven conversation that we may not have had to this extent before we started our journey on bringing visualization as a key factor for innovation in the legal field. So the next part is also another example that's more about knowledge visualization. So we have tons of very interesting notes, speeches, legal opinion, legal advice, and it's very tedious to really look sometimes to long inventory or to enterprise content management system, but you can use visualization to make this sort of knowledge much more alive and much more accessible. So here, using the visual metaphor of a tube map, we could design an overview of 5 main topics. They would draw the tube lines, as you know, from a city metro, and then the station would be in a sequential order, in this one on chronological, the development of a number of more detailed topics. So overview first, detail on demands, the classical credo of visualizers. So that's an important aspect, that we get a little less captive of the world of words, and we go more into the world of visualization. So the lawyers tend to sometimes really enjoy referring to complex set of sources to make their points, but their clients, be they lawyer or non-lawyer, are impatient. 16 eloquently addressed how we are in an economy, or if not war for attention, and that our attention span is extremely limited, 2 to 6 seconds, 2 to 8 seconds, depending on the studies and the sources you are reading. But basically, we cannot count that the people will lend us all the attention that we would need to make our expose. Here is an example where many documents were used to explain the type of legislative technique, and now we have moved without losing in terms of integrity of knowledge and added value of the legal advice that the lawyer gives. That will never, a visual will never replace a legal advice, but will definitely avail timely operational information that, if they come late in the process, may create a lot of governance disruption, a lot of waste of productivity, a lot of useless and avoidable bugs in our routine. So that's a little bit the sort of things we are doing more and more, availing knowledge across the organization to really use knowledge sharing as a factor for really availing best state of information possible without wasting too much of the precious time of our counterparts. So all I presented until now would not have been possible if we had not worked on building visualization capabilities internally. Delegating to communication expert or external is surely important and needed. We need advanced capacities, yet it takes to rethink our working and see visual literacy as a cornerstone in the third decade of the 21st century with white-collar workers. Visualization, as 16 said, is the 25th official language of the EU. If we train our visual muscle in our day-to-day, we relate to our own tacit knowledge and wisdom with very, very different approach than if we only think and express ourselves in words and number. What you see here is a way of visually journaling our work, our effort, our added value. These are meeting minutes, what you see on screen. And we do them for our internal purposes. It's not just because we communicate with the citizen. How can we feel what the citizen feel if we are not ourselves using the same approach to treat ourselves? Empathy is born from first-hand experience. So at once, we deeply grasp that visualizing is not decorating, it is analyzing, it is thinking, it is empathizing, it is relating. And so it's really important to realize that our visual sense is super overstimulated while our imagination is super underused. And that is something that we need to tackle and harness. It's complicated, it's soft, it's hard to thematize and operationalize, but it's not because it's hard that it shall not be done. And so to really move to the, let's say, so what of the entire conversation that I have offered to you today is really a plaidoyer for using vision to think. And it's really important to realize how much visualization and how important the visual cortex is in our cognitive processes, how much artificial intelligence founding fathers, or let's say developers, have inspired themselves from our visual cortex. So it really matters a lot to understand the value and vitality of this energy our brain uses in the visual cortex, and in disproportionate amount of oxygen in comparison to the other parts. So there is something to this that we need to realize. Some people say I'm visual, others I'm not visual. It has nothing to do with that. The operating system consume enormous visual input in order to make sense and orient ourselves in our lives. So I hope my plaidoyer in favor of using data and knowledge visualization for the law has, if not convince you, at least spark some interest. I claim, as more and more in the legal domain, we see blossoming trainings and book on legal design thinking, that lawyers are late adopters, but they will profit and experience as fast forward this new possibility to combine multiple medium, numerical, word, visual, and that one is not there to substitute the other, but to augment our cognition, and so that citizen and society can only profit from such a shift if the guardian of the law, the lawyers, understand data, visualization, and last but not least, digitalization in their own skin. So I thank you for your attention, and look forward if one or the other question comes our way.
They certainly will. Thank you so much, Valérie, for that very comprehensive talk. Now we're running over time, so I'd appreciate for the next speaker, and actually for the break for people, if you can try to keep answers concise, but I realize that might be difficult. The most popular question so far is, you seem to make a strong link between visualization and public debate. Can you please elaborate?
Oh, thank you for, very much an important question. I will just answer with a visual. The red bus for the Brexit. This was really a visualization with a number, the pretended budget sent to the EU. I would have a lot to elaborate on, but I think that visualization makes the point in one go.
I think that's an excellently concise and very visual answer indeed. Yes, we will not elaborate further on that point. Another question that's very popular. Do you work with a designer? And if you do, at what point in the process do you include them in the team?
So basically, we have worked for all that is publicized on Urlex. We work together with the Office of Publication colleague. We have done a lot of homemade, we baked the cake at home quite a lot, and they astutely turned that into visuals for publication in the website. Otherwise, for internal purposes, we have used communities of practice, so-called legal hub, and we do peer-based intravision and peer learning, and here and there we invite trainers to grow the capacity, but we believe that this is a skill that needs to be mastered by the people in the team versus outsourced, because you cannot separate thinking from designing. You need to intertwine, and we prefer a little less glossy and shiny, but more integration. And then we will see if the journey continues to expand. We may have to, of course, recourse to better people who know how to better use certain software to lend us some support.
Thank you so much, Valérie. There are plenty more questions for you, and as always, I'm directing our audience members to send them perhaps more directly to you, and if you feel that they are worth elaborating on further to a wider public, perhaps you can make your answers available in another format yet to be discussed. Thank you so much, Valérie.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.